All right, welcome everybody to our November 4th meeting. This is the AppliedAI meetup. My name is Justin Grammons, and on behalf of myself and Eric Naribo and Allison, two other co-founders of the AppliedAI meetup and the Emerging Technologies user group, thank you for joining us. A few just items that I wanted to talk about a little bit here. I'm going to cut and paste a couple things into the chat. First of all, we did this last month, and I'd like to do it again. We are looking at potentially figuring out what times work best for people for these meetings. So we've been doing these events here during the evening, around 6:30 to 7:30 to 8 o'clock or so. We've created a survey just to kind of get some feedback from people. Would you like them maybe over lunch, maybe early in the morning, maybe late afternoon? So I'm going to drop a link in there in the chat here in Zoom, and we welcome you to put the vote in, and we'll see what people want to do. The other thing too is just some other shameless plugs. We have a podcast called Conversations on Applied AI, and I will drop a link into that as well. One of our guests here tonight, Mike Hugo, actually was on the podcast some weeks ago, and we're always looking for more people. So I'll try and get some of our, try and get Ari and Marlaina actually to get on the podcast as well. But I welcome you to please take a listen to some of our podcast episodes, and we can hopefully continue to keep the conversation going outside of just the meetup here. And then the other thing is we have a YouTube channel. So I'll put a link into that as well in the chat with regards to, we're recording this tonight. We'll go ahead and put it out on our YouTube channel, and most of our other ones that we've done over the past couple of years or so here have been put on YouTube as well. So if you miss one, you're not able to attend our meetup, you can always check out the YouTube channel. We do meet on the first Thursday of every month. So our next meeting is going to be on December 2nd. We don't have it up on the site yet, but plan on being here back again 6:30 on December 2nd to meet up with us. So tonight we're super lucky. Well, actually, let me cut and paste that information here in real quick into the chat so you have it here. I don't forget about it. So tonight we're going to be talking a little bit about how local startups are using artificial intelligence, kind of leveraging artificial intelligence within their companies. And I'm going to share a little bit about myself, and then we'll sort of like go down the line. But as I was thinking about this meeting here, I was more or less thinking about, just the way in general AI is changing our lives, right? There's a lot of ways that it's changing businesses and the way that it's changing us as humans, right? And using artificial intelligence, kind of what we were talking about sort of earlier on before this, what are some things that humans don't really want to be doing, right? And what are some tasks where maybe there's human error involved? AI has sort of stepped in and allowed us to do that. Everything from analyzing images and videos and audio to actually there's robots out there that can, take risks instead of humans, right? When it comes to mining, when it comes to inspecting wind turbines, when it comes to taking control of the road with smart cars, all that, there's a lot of safety aspects that AI is able to provide to us. It's also, it never gets tired, right? So it can be applied 24/7, which is a very, very powerful thing. And we're starting to live more and more with this sort of digital world. So digital assistants, chatbots, for example, you go on a website, you can start asking questions around things that feel very natural, and you can start getting responses back. You can talk to your Alexa or talk to your Google Home, today. So it really, in general, I think it has the opportunity to make businesses and our lives more efficient. And what's cool is that on top of all of that, it actually creates, I believe, a new market, a new opportunity, kind of trying to bring it back to what we're talking about tonight, a new opportunity for startups, to create products in this area that really were not able to be created, say 5-10 years ago or so. So tonight we're blessed to have 3 founders here from startups in the Twin Cities, and they'll be talking and introducing themselves, how they're leveraging AI to help their customers. And first, I was just going to tell you a little bit briefly about myself and some of the organizations that I'm involved with, and then we'll sort of go down the line. Hopefully everybody can see the slide deck that we have up of our presenters. And again, I'll be moderating tonight, kind of helping the conversation go, but I think once all 4 of us get going, everyone's going to be sort of jumping in. But I'll start with myself. I am, as I mentioned earlier, the co-founder of the AppliedAI meetup, but I'm also, involved with 2 companies here that are using artificial intelligence. And one of them is called Captivation, and we really work on helping people become better presenters using artificial intelligence, or what we would call an AI coach. So how are we using AI in our product? Well, we're using it for sort of speech to text translation. And we take a listen of how people are presenting, listen to their pitch. And again, we don't do this. The artificial intelligence does that, listens to their pace. What sort of words are they using? Are they using strong communication skills? Are they using a lot of space fillers or word banks, right? So we're actually able to imagine a human having to listen through all of this information as a person is presenting. We can apply an artificial intelligence algorithm to that. And then also, it's not only audio, but video as well. So we can take a look at somebody's face, say, what's the sort of tone you're giving off, right? Or what's your eye contact, or what's your sentiment? Maybe what's the surroundings or the environment that you're presenting in? So that's one product that I'm working on, and that is called Captivation. And the other one is a company called IoT on a Stick. And we sort of brand it as infrastructure-free intelligence. And it's a piece of hardware. It's what we call a stick that's self-powered, and it can be deployed anywhere. It's really working in the industrial artificial intelligence of things space. And it's highly configurable. It allows you to add sensors. If you wanted to add a camera, if you wanted to add a microphone to it, any type of sensor, temperature, vibration. But imagine this brain that's sitting out in the field somewhere. You can start hooking up sensors to it, and it can start reading that information and then applying machine learning algorithms on top of it. And so the applications for this type of device, we believe, are kind of endless. And today we're using it for computer vision specifically to sort of recognize license plates, and it's installed at a local regional airport, and we can start tracking cars that are coming in and out of the airport. So instead of actually having somebody, a security guard, having to monitor this 24/7, we can detect when certain things happen out in the field, send alerts, obviously track who should and shouldn't come in and out of the facility. So again, very sort of platform agnostic. You can hook up any sensor you want, but really, really cool. So that is me. And those are a couple of the AI startups that I'm involved with. I think we'll just sort of work from left to right. And again, I think we'll start with Marlaina. Be awesome for you to introduce yourself, and then Ari will go next, and then Mike, maybe tell a little bit, Marlaina, about your company, maybe how you got started and why you got started, and maybe and any other fun facts you want to share.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely want to say thank you again for having me as a guest panel today. It's such an awesome privilege to share the stage with each and every one of you tonight. So, a little bit about me. My name is Marlaina Love, and by day, I am a project manager. Right now, I work as a project manager in autonomy vehicle. It's been in my role for like 3 months now. Pretty exciting, and we're leveraging all the emerging technology to make a car autonomous off highway. But I've been in my role as a project manager for 5 years in many industries in the software development space. And by night, I am a first time startup founder in the ed tech space for a company called PipeDream Academy, which is an e-learning platform empowering learners to explore affordable alternative pathways to a more fulfilling and meaningful career. We leverage AI and data analytics to provide learners a more personalized and guided experience as they navigate their career path, and it's just based on their own personal strength and interests. The journey how I got here was an interesting one and a fun one at that one. In fact, it really started, I think, 2 months before I enrolled at my alma mater, University of Memphis. I knew I always wanted to be in business and technology, mainly because I knew what it was like to be poor and I just wanted to get away from that lifestyle. And I have that as a lifestyle anymore. And because of that, I knew that college was that stepping stone for me. I went to college with those big dreams that if I do really good, do good grades, I'll have a career. But somewhere between college and my career, that's when the environment kicked in and said, no, business isn't for you. That's unrealistic. That's the pipe dream. You need to have a 9 to 5. You need to go up the ladder. You need at least 10 years before you can start a business. And no one did see it. And even myself started to believe that maybe it wasn't real for me. I think it was recently, as in less than 2 years ago, when in my career, I had this big dream that I'll go up the ladder, but every role that I had, it was very toxic with no guidance, no mentorship, even to the point where I had managers who said, maybe IT isn't for you, that you should consider something else. And I was just really stuck in my career and just didn't know where to go with that. And so I would say this time last year was really a turning point for me, where I just had to do like a pause moment and do a life reset and really figure out what it is that I wanted to do with my career. And that was, I knew I wanted to be in business and I wanted to be a part of the future in technology. And that's where AI came into play. So just doing that reset and just really putting that tunnel vision in front of me, putting myself in position and in conversations around that, that's where I really started this journey. This journey end up introducing me to Blacks in Technology, where I'm the chapter president of, and also a member of Women in AI, which introduced me to their accelerator program, where they help women take all these amazing ideas and they take you through a process to turn an idea into a concept. And that's where PipeDream was born. When I was in my second job this year, and I came into another toxic situation where it just did not work out for me. And I was like, you know what? This was not my life that I wanted. And I know that I needed guidance and experience to help me to get me to where I needed to be. So once I went through that own personal experience, that's when I realized that Pipe Dream Academy, that's the business I want to start. Because if you're a high school student, who's to tell you that college is your only option, or that you can't be a businesswoman, or you can't pursue different paths? There's options out there, and you need that guidance. And if you're in your career, who's to say that you should be stuck in project management like I was, because that's what your career told you? That you should explore your passion and pursue that with guidance and mentorship. And you should have that safe environment to fill up and as much as you can to make sure that that's for you. So that's how I came into Pipe Dream Academy, and just connecting with the right people, the right networks, it allowed me to really grow into the space of AI and to launch my first startup.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Marlaina. And we're blessed to have you here to join the Applied AI meetup, and hopefully continue to engage with the community and come back in future months for sure. Always welcome. Ari, would like to go next?
Sure. That was an inspiring story. My story is actually quite similar to Marlaina, but my name is Ari Odaya. I am the founder of Sid Technologies. We are based here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We are applying big data and emerging technologies to evaluate, uncover, and correct the influence of human bias on decision-making and communication. And we're doing this through the development of what I call a regulatory AI model. We're starting with a natural language processor that works very similarly to Grammarly, with the exception of we are helping users uncover and identify their biases and become more aware of their biases, and also helping them correct those biases by suggesting more inclusive terms to use in their communication, and recommending other options within their decision flow. We are also, SID is currently engaged in beta. We're one of the fall beta cohort members. We are also in MIT Solve incubator, and recently made the 10 finalists for MIT's Digital Workforce Challenge. And there we hope to gain the much needed capital to build upon our model and continue to improve on our model and take it to market. Why did I get started? Well, that's a long story, but I actually I actually started to learn about the real life capability of AI back in 2018 when the Super Bowl was in town. I also run another company, Collectively Digital, which is a digital marketing agency. And we made I think it was 300 or 400 something local companies that were selected to deliver services to the NFL and their affiliates while they were in town. And that was through the NFL Business Connect portal. Through that engagement, I was able to, I gained access to various different events. One of the events was was SportsCon that was held at Optum, on the Optum campus. And really the conversation was really all about the stadium technology and how they were using AI through the various different strategies, from the seating to the POS system to your mobile device and the connectivity in and around, how they were leveraging AI to market to people outside of the game, and and within around the stadium, how businesses in and around the stadium can tap onto that technology and amplify what they're doing and promote what they're doing, right? So it was really fascinating. But I noticed that I was one of the only females in the room, and one of very few brown people in the room. So that was very jarring. I mean, it's not surprising, but still jarring, and around that time in 2018 was Kaepernick had taken a knee. It was the height of Black Lives Matter protests. Trumpism was rising. There was a lot going on, right? So here I am learning about this amazing technology and how it's being used. And initially, SID started as a MarTech solution, right? How can we use AI to better market to women? Because all the conversations during the Super Bowl, and I must say, the NCAA, the Final Four in 2019 were very male skewed, right? I mean, these brands were completely missing out on the female market, right? Everything was male skewed, the content, strategy, everything. So the goal for SID was initially to better target women. But with all the social issues happening at that time, it didn't feel right for me, right? It just didn't drive me. And what drove me was to change things, outlooks for myself as a woman of color, as a woman in this business space in Minnesota. I wanted to improve my outlooks, and I'm reading about Grammarly and reading about all these amazing companies and how they're using AI and technology and data to really improve the lives of people. Imagine being able to whiz through an email, right? And just a blog, and just kind of get through that without a typo, and you're writing it. Grammarly teaches you how to write, right? Imagine if you had a tool like that can make you more conscious of your biases, because our biases, as Marlaina has explained, can be very toxic, right? And impacts other people, and they hurt other people, and they oppress other people. And I personally, we all have biases. I personally don't want my bias to cause harm, right? So throughout this process, I want to know about my biases, and I want to have conversations that make others aware of their biases and how they impact me, right? We see a lot of these biases in the workplace. I mean, the Great Resignation that's taking place over the last few months. I mean, people are realizing that they don't, with remote work now, you don't have to be in those spaces. You can demand your worth. And that's a privilege that we have as remote workers, right? That's actually quite a privilege. We learned about that last year with the pandemic. But at the same time, what we've also learned is that, one, we can we can actually perform and deliver our work in less time when we're not in those toxic spaces, right? And then we have more time for us, for self, and for family to do the things that are important for us. So how can what we're working on now through, what we're thinking through with MIT Solve is, how can we use this technology for the digital workforce in those collaborative spaces, right? And help us be more mindful as we collaborate with people from all over the world now. Most Americans now are collaborating with counterparts in other countries, emerging countries, where they have no clue what those cultures are. And we are such a society that, how do I say this without offending anyone? We're technically, we're quite ignorant as a society here, right? There's, in terms of our education, in terms of our awareness of other cultures, in terms of our respect of other cultures, and how our language is deeply rooted in biases, like the English language, the American English modern language is, I mean, I just said black box. And I'm thinking, what other word could I have used for that, right? Like even the term, for me, minority, and the way I look at minority, even minority is indicative of Black people, right? Or immigrants, right? And they may not actually be the minority in the room or in the community, but they're still considered a minority. It's an othering effect, right? So just being more mindful of that. And I feel like when we become more mindful and we think twice about how we talk to people, our actions follow, right? Actions follow, and then that inclusion, you know, with that mindfulness and inclusion, diversity is really a residual of that, right? It just comes naturally. You don't have to think about it if you're being inclusive and mindful from the very beginning. Yeah, so how I got started with SID, I'm still getting started, I should say. I should make that clear. I'm still getting started. This year has been the first year. I've been working on SID for about 3 years now, since 2019. And this year is the first year that I've actually had some forward movement. And I'm excited about being in the beta program as well as MIT's program. It just validates the solution itself and the need in the market. So I'm looking forward to continuing to build network and continue to build upon our model. And we plan to take it to market, well, closed beta next Q1 and Q2 of 2022. And our goal is to take it to market, our solution to market in Q1 of 2023.
Excellent, excellent, cool, very exciting.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ari, I can't agree with you enough with regards to just, you know, there's a lot of bias in AI, and I think we'll be talking about that too as well. It's hard to train these things because sometimes the data you're pulling in already has that baked in. So there's a whole, you know, side of ethical AI and bias that I know will, as we talk through, I'd like to hear more with regards to how you're trying to overcome those challenges as well. Last but not least, Mike, Hugo, why don't you tell us a little bit about your company, Vyasa, and what you guys are doing?
Fantastic. Well, thanks a lot for having me. It's a pleasure to be here tonight to speak with you all. My background is actually in software development. So I have been building software and web-based applications for quite a while now. I was fortunate to be part of a startup called Entigen, which we built in the life sciences space to help build knowledge graphs from scientific literature. And our goal had always been at Entigen to be able to allow researchers to ask questions. And we were able to do that with the knowledge graph by letting them kind of put things on a graph, interactive dashboard space, and connect things with clicks and dots. But we really had always wanted to be able to let a user actually type in a question and say, what are the symptoms of COVID-19, or what drugs can be used to treat this disease, and let the users not just get documents back or Google search results, but the actual answer to a question. We never quite got there with Antigen. We were able to build that company, and we sold it to Thomson Reuters in 2013. We stuck around for a while, made sure that software found a place of value at Thomson Reuters. And then, of course, as founders often do, we jumped ship and started a new company, Vyasa. So at Vyasa, we're again working in the life sciences and healthcare space. We're working with a lot of text. That's one of our primary areas of focus. And we have actually built an interface where users can ask a natural language question and get the answers back to those questions. We also do work in two other areas in life sciences space. The first is in image analytics. So there's actually a lot of really fascinating work happening right now in digital pathology and understanding images from MRIs and X-rays, because there's just so much more data now that's happening in healthcare. And that takes a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of people to actually look at those images. And as Justin was mentioning at the top, sometimes that work isn't the most exciting, right? It's if you had to sit and look at radiology images 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you'll quickly get burned out, right? So there's a lot of work happening in digital pathology, allowing computers to do some of that work. And what they're doing is they're helping focus the attention. The radiologists, the doctors are still involved in that decision-making process. We're not replacing anybody or eliminating any jobs. What we're trying to do is help them look at the problems that are a little fuzzier, look at the things that maybe need a little higher order inferencing to make a decision. And the really easy, basic ones, we can just highlight an area of focus and they can say yes or no and move on to the next one without having to spend a lot of time on it. And then the third area we're working in is in small compound analytics. So this is things like actual molecular structures. So a lot of the pharmaceutical companies have massive databases of drugs that never made it to market. They maybe, they had an idea, they brought it to trial, and it didn't have any effect on the thing they thought it was going to work on. And there's actually a lot of value in the data that they captured about the progress of that drug through the trial, because it's oftentimes valuable for something else. And the something else is a little unknown. You may not know what it's good for, but using deep learning and AI, we're able to kind of analyze that historical data and do some hypothesis generation and analysis of information that these companies have to help identify areas that they may be able to accelerate something and bring something to market more quickly. In the text analytics space, we do a lot of document insight extraction. We do a lot of natural language question answering. We also have a deep learning data fabric that is able to crawl massive amounts of data from multiple different sources and put it in an interface that people can just use a simple interface, even though under the covers, it might be asking questions of 10 different databases and 4 different document repositories. To the end user, they don't really care where that data is coming from. We have an interface that just lets them get at the answers. So that's what we've been doing. That's what we're building. And it's been really exciting to see the technology come to a point where we're able to actually provide some software that's useful, that's helping researchers get to their end goals much more quickly and much more efficiently.
That's great. That's great. That's super exciting. Obviously a really hot space, I guess, when it comes to medical solutions and analytics. So awesome. Well, I think 2 things I wanted to say, I guess. First is if anybody has any questions along the way, I would definitely encourage you, go ahead and just plop them in the chat box here, and I'll work them in. I'll ask our guests about that. So feel free to do that at any time. We'll also have probably a formal Q&A here at the end as well. And as long as I've got some questions here that are just more like generally based as well, I'm just kind of calling them popcorn questions, I guess, that we'll do at the end. But I think let's circle back to Marlaina. I was thinking about, maybe what opportunities or challenges do you see AI present for learners navigating through their careers?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with the most natural opportunity is the whole personalized guided learning.
Mm,
We all know that we learn differently from others. And when I think about PipeDream Academy, as in how we're learning, there is something I learned in my research where we call it the pedagogy experience. It's the teaching experience. We live in a generation or traditional education where it's knowledge transfer, meaning that what the teacher is speaking, it goes into one ear and sometimes, like me, it goes out the other ear. But we're good at memorization to get an A. Whereas the focus is how can we be in the era of knowledge generation, where we're taking what we learn and applying it. And so when I founded Pipe Dream Academy, it was really in mind of those who learn by doing and who are visuals. Put that into practice from a career standpoint. Very recently, I became certified in Scrum. But what I learned in the classroom is quite different from what I learned first day in the workplace, where I'm told that, you know what, maybe Scrum is not for you. I'm like, well, I did get my certification, but I'm not an expert. So when we think about that, yeah, you learn it, but that's it. We want to have reinforcement learning from a human mind where you're doing it over and over to a confidence level where you say, you know what, I got it. And that's kind of the where I want to go with PipeDream Academy is like, how can we have it in a way where it's stimulation, meaning that you're basically trying a career before you buy it, you're learning it over and over and over, where now you get it, you're comfortable, you have your safe space to learn over and over, and you have that guidance and mentorship that prepare you for that job versus saying, I got my certification, let me put it on my resume and then realize, yeah, that's not it for me. But sticking to that personalized guided experience where it's adaptive as you go is definitely a an opportunity for that. And traditional learning systems just don't give kids, even adults, that freedom to just really learn on their own based on their own ability, including accessibility in that aspect. From a challenge perspective, there's really two things that come in mind. And being a person of color, it's always important to talk about tech equity gap, especially with AI. All this technology is cool, but it means nothing if they can't access it. So um, having the means of technology just so they can learn in a way is really important. And with me having PipeDream Academy, building the software product isn't enough. It's really partnering with other organizations in the city to build technical training centers where our kids can have access to the technology just to have these different options. And most importantly, where I advocate the most, which is almost like taboo and the opposite of technology and AI, is the human element of it. Is that we're so dependent on it. And because I'm focused on kids, um, I don't want to train them up where they know is technology and they don't even understand critical thinking, the basic human skills, the identity, the morals, how to adopt with other cultures. And so for me, it's important to have that healthy balance where I think you were mentioning earlier. How do we coexist with technology, not with fear, but to leverage it to help solve those problems that we're wanting to solve for? So to be able to critical think on my own or leverage technology enough to know like this is a tool and not like a savior and something that's going to stop me from doing something, that is important. And it's even more important today, where as an adult, that we want technology to make a decision, but there has to be a balance where we can take the data and do an analysis and analytics and make the decisions for ourselves and not the technology.
mhm, mhm. Sure, sure, makes sense. I mean, as you were talking about like the first part with regards to education, this thinking is if we have enough data, we can create a super doctor, we can create a super educator, a super teacher, maybe we can create a super robot, right? So once you have enough data, and it feels to me like maybe the first piece that you were talking about was how can we create, like you were mentioning, personalized guided learning that is essentially the best of all worlds. Is that a good way to sort of like sum up what how you're looking to apply AI to your ed
Yeah,
tech?
absolutely. And to Mike's points earlier, just adding on to that, I don't think you will truly have all of the data that you would need to build the model. That's where another aspect is important. That's the human element to continue to be customer focused, keeping them engaged in the process
Mhm.
as well. Especially from an ethical and inclusion process, we can't build a product for our customers if we don't keep them involved in a product development process. So naturally, we can have the data. Let's take the radiology, for instance. We can give it all the images, but there's a lot of unknowns, known unknowns, unknowns to know, like, is this good quality data? So there's still a lot of data we have to play with, but just keeping that human centric a part of it. Keep having those conversations and talking those areas. It can be more available. And one more point there is, if I were to say how we want to control the technology, would be the supervised part, where you have control of the data you're inputting output of what you want that technology to do.
Right. Sure. For sure. That's great. Yeah. You can't just let it sort of run amok, I guess, with regards to artificial intelligence. Ari, let's turn the conversation, I think, to you a little bit. What companies, and I guess, are doing anything to limit bias in their algorithms that you know of? And I guess as a follow-up, or anything as consumers of us, just the general population, is there anything you think we can do to help this at all?
Companies that are working towards solving the problem of bias, there's the Algorithmic Justice League by Joy, which we all familiar with. I know IBM and Accenture have their fairness AI that really mitigates biases, that identifies gaps in your algorithm or your data. What a lot of these solutions, or the two solutions that I mentioned, don't do, they don't necessarily fill the gap, right? They're able to identify it, but they don't fill that gap of and that's where we come into play, where we bridge that gap in fairness, right? We deploy the data that's missing within your AI or your model, right? And we aim to really regulate equitable outcomes is the goal with our solution. How the public can contribute to this effort is the way you vote right now. It really, one, vote. That's a privilege that we have as Americans, so vote. Two, vote wisely, be very aware and take the time to really understand what these candidates stand for, and especially in the tech space, right? There's a lot going on with Facebook. I feel like when I'm always reading, every week there's something, and this is the space that we're kind of, how do I put this? As we evolve in tech, as our technology evolves, it's really important that as the public, as everyday people, that we play a role in that evolution, right? That we are aware of what that evolution means and how it impacts us and our neighbors. And I say all this to say that there's a level of regulation and ethics that needs to be applied to AI. And this is the kind of murky space that Facebook is in right now. So the public needs to pay better attention to these issues, around AI ethics, around inclusion in the tech space, from a gender and from a racial perspective in the workforce. They need to pay attention to those issues. As you know, if you're a hiring manager or decision maker, you know, ask yourself as you make these hires, you know, be more aware of why are you hiring this person versus that person? Do you have enough gender and racial diversity in the pool of candidates that you're considering? You know, make it a conscious effort to do that, even and think outside the box in terms of skill set and what this person's experience and education can bring to the table, right? Like Marlaina said, some people need that coaching, that mentorship, right? And it's not necessarily that they're incapable of doing the work, but it's that they need more. They need coaching. I mean, there's a lot of in college, I had the privilege of having an internship, right? A lot of students of color don't have that privilege, right? So there's a lot of soft skills that we often miss out on gaining through internships because we've had to kind of become responsible fairly early in life, right? You know, instead of sitting at an internship, we're probably working or having to play a role in supporting our families, or for one reason or another, right? Mm-hmm. So there's that component. So as the public, if you're in this role, be more mindful if you're hiring practice. You know, ask the decision makers at your companies about various different solutions, like how are we mitigating bias internally? Mm-hmm. That's a fair question.
Yeah. Well, who is your target market for SID, would you say? I mean, anybody that needs to make some of these decisions?
Well, CIOs, HR, we're navigating operation COs, DEI, procurement officers are our target. We are initially with SID. When I came up with the idea for SID, I was looking at the media space, right? The target was in the media space. When you look at marketing and entertainment, it has a huge, and that's my background. That's where I come. My background is film and entertainment. And we have a huge role to play in how biases and stereotypes are perpetuated, because we do it in film and television. We do it in arts, right? This is why Dr. Seuss's 6 of his titles were pulled, because before we can speak, right, before we actually can formulate the words to say, we've learned certain biases, right? So when you notice those things in your day-to-day, remove them. Those are biases. It's probably not going to be, if you have a Dr. Seuss book in a house, I have to tell you, you might want to just, hang that up, put that away, collector's item, put it away. It's baked with bias. So be more aware of how these biases creep up or influence you. The audiences, the market that we're learning that we could potentially play a space that I wasn't aware of was in the public safety and policing space. So we are engaged in MIT's Unbundling Policing and Reimagining Public Safety. And I'm just learning, it's like how I put this? It's like a knowledge dump. It's just so much, right? It's just so much there, and so many opportunities to improve the system. I never dreamt that we would have this opportunity to actually drive change at this level, right? And it's very exciting for me to to know that we can actually change lives, in the sense that we can either save lives, change mindsets, perspectives, like relationship. It's, to Mike's point, or maybe it's Justin, you were the one that made this point, like Sid is agnostic, right? Sid can be tooled to solve a whole host of issues, right? It's just, what is your objective? What is your problem? And how do we tool it to do this, to solve your problem?
Sure. That's very cool. That's very good. Very good. Yeah, I was just going to move on quickly here to Mike, I guess. How have you seen the technology improve when it comes to biomedical data sets over the past, few years?
So I think the thing that we've seen in the biotech space recently is everybody's familiar with basic named entity recognition, like a computer identifying a location in a paragraph, or a person's name or a company name. Those sorts of things get tagged in articles all the time. But in the biomedical space, things like disease names, drug names, gene locations, in the clinical trial space, what types of drug combinations are being studied, what types of diseases are being studied. It's a much more niche kind of knowledge area of information that we're trying to extract from text. And the data sets really haven't been as large for that domain as they have been in other areas. What's new recently is with deep learning and text analytics, we're able to apply transfer learning to these sorts of problems. So this has been available for images for a long time, where Google or NVIDIA or a large organization will fire up a large cluster of computers, and they spend weeks letting the computers read through a bunch of, all of the Google index, or all of Wikipedia, or all of, a whole bunch of text documents, and kind of starting to understand the grammar of text and the context of how sentences are written and the relationships between words and sentences. And that information is foundational to being able to correctly and accurately tag information from text, or extract information from text. And with deep learning, we can now use that. It's called a base model. And we use that as the foundation for being able to fine tune a model for a specific domain. So whereas before we would have had to build up an enormous volume of tagged information about diseases and drugs and so on, now what we can do is we can take that base model, fine tune it on a smaller set of data, and come out the other side with an even more accurate model, even though we didn't have to do as much work in the training phase. So I think that's the biggest thing, is that these new approaches allow us to take something that's been trained on a large amount of information to give us a foundation that we can then build upon to do a specific, answer a specific question, or extract a specific type of information from text that wasn't possible before. And I think that's probably the biggest thing. The other thing is there's an explosion of open source projects. There's things like the Hugging Face website that has models, it has training scripts, it also has data sets. There's a whole bunch of GitHub repositories that have information on how to train models to do different types of things. So it's a little bit of the deep learning allowing us to do base model and transformation, or transformer based learning and transfer learning. And then the other piece is just this explosion of excitement in the deep learning space, and being able to leverage a community of people who are excited about this, and building algorithms and publishing that, and taking that community and using that sort of foundation for building out products and tools that are useful for companies and organizations.
Sure. Yeah, what you were talking about with regards to transfer learning kind of made me think about a thing that I'd like to maybe touch on a little bit more is, when I've started startups and built stuff along the way, we're usually looking for how can we figure out like product market fit. So how can we build something for the minimum viable product, right? And I know when we started Captivation, for example, we were looking at, geez, how can we do essentially speech to text translation? And so there's lots of open source projects out there and you could kind of build a model and try it, but it was nowhere near as good as something that you would get from, say, Google or, you know, Microsoft or Amazon or something like that. When you guys started, and this is more across the board, I think for everybody, you know, when you're starting to build your startup, you know, did you guys just start building your own models straight out of the gate? Were you able to find, or did you use third-party services? Or, you know, if somebody's going to get into this game and they start wanting to build stuff, you can spend a year just working on trying to tune the thing enough, you know, to work. So be curious to see what your perspective is with regards to, if I'm starting an AI company today, where would you suggest with regards to building the intelligence?
I can start. Like,
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time doing some research and did come upon ML Common, some GitHub repositories, as Mike mentioned, and did some learning there. There are some base models that you can build upon that are available out on GitHub. So that's how we got started. One of our challenges, though, is the data sets, right? Which makes me super interested in Mike's solution. I would love to connect offline with you and Justin as well. You know, we've had to manually aggregate our data set, and you know, through the programs that we're engaged in, my hope is that we'll be able to deploy it and have some test cases to prove and validate the technology. We've validated it and tested it, but not on a larger scale, and we need to be able to do that on a larger scale. And I find it interesting, you know, with algorithmic bias, the whole issue around that is the lack of data, and that's kind of what we're struggling with, right? The big picture goal, you know, is to develop a baseline model that's open source that everyone can use to build upon, to ensure that their solution is inclusive, is ethical, and you know, has a positive impact versus the other way around.
Feels like you need to build a Wikipedia in some, like it needs to be open like that, right?
Yeah, it needs to be open. And with SID, I really truly believe it's a community effort, right? It's going to take industry, academia, and government, to be quite frank. When we're talking about mitigating biases within systems and institutions that are 400 or so plus years old, that are embedded in policies and laws, you know, and really bridging the gaps in fairness, and being able to, as Mike's solution does, assess a document and really assess it in a way where it's connects the dots in bias and fairness, right? Like, you know, this is a policy, but this group seems to, you know, be at a disadvantage, and how does this disadvantage trickle down, the impact of that disadvantage based on this policy?
Right, for sure. Marlaina, how have you started, I guess, tackling the problem, or did you start tackling the problem with regards to, you know, building your own data sets or taking something public, or what phase are you at?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely in the beginning phases where I'm going through a second round customer discovery to build that initial non-software MVP. And because I realized how important it is to get the foundational level, I started the whole concepting with technology consultants. So I partner with AWS. I have like a whole team of technologists that I just have ongoing conversations to at least get me on the right path, like understanding all the capabilities when it comes to AI. And I, based on my target market, I build out my lean model canvas, and naturally being a project manager with a business analyst background, I draw out those processes and I say, where do AI fit into that? Make my assumptions. And in my customer discovery, that's when I talk to the customers, to my market. I have conversations with them. I say, let's validate this. Tell me where you are, what those pain points are. And I have that ongoing conversation between my target market and my customer, not my customer, my consultants, to say, does it make sense? Where are those gaps? So it's before I invest in the technology, I want to make sure that, like you said earlier, a product market fit, it makes sense. And I'm keeping my customers in mind, that are we really addressing their problems with this type of technology that we have. That's pretty much where I'm at right now, is validating that this concept is needed, it has value, and it's actually solving a problem for them, and just really having a diverse team of specialists who can give me a 360 overview from a technology standpoint where it works. I talk to people from AI, from data, even from legal and communications. Like, what did this sound like across different cultures, different communities? I involve everyone in the beginning and throughout the process.
For sure. Good. That's great. That's great. Yeah, obviously the bigger community you can bring in to sort of hone in on what you need to do, the better. For you, Mike, yeah, you guys have your own models, I'm guessing, right now, but is that the way it has always been, or did you leverage some third parties and stuff like that to begin with to at least get a jump start?
We actually always built our own. The rationale for that was that our product actually has two components. First is that we analyze publicly available information, like clinicaltrials.gov has a whole bunch of information publicly published that's about clinical trials that are currently in progress and previously run. But a lot of the work that we do is on internal client document repositories. So in those scenarios, the data itself can't leave the customer's firewall.
Sure.
So we can't leverage third-party services. We need to have everything baked into the software that we deploy. And so that's why we focused on building our own models and including that in the software stack from the get-go. I will say that 5 years ago, that was a lot harder to do. And recently there's become just a whole wealth of projects and models and kind of foundational technology that wasn't there before. And so we've started adapting more of that as we've gone, and refactoring things to take advantage of newer things that have been recently published. But yeah, we did make the painful decision to write it all ourselves to begin with.
Sure, sure. Well, I think that is a way to go. Yeah, if you're around for the long run, right? You'll look back and appreciate. You're glad that you did it, but yeah, it's certainly easier just to call a third party and have them return you some information. But cool, yeah. No, it is a challenge that we had, especially when we were starting out with Captivation, because not only did we got a little bit pigeonholed, because if you use a lot of basically speech to text translators, they will actually filter out words, especially words that are not in the English language. So we would get a lot of gaps in there. And so if you talk to Alexa and you say, Alexa, how about you do this? It'll just hear, how about you do this? And so what we need to do is really go word for word. And so those were the challenges that we sort of like ran into, was having to either leverage an outside service that had those words that were in there that most language processors just ignore, or essentially tune our own. So it was a little bit of a challenge as well for us to try and mix and match things together.
So were you able to leverage a service to do that, or did you have to come up with your own training set, or how did you find a mechanism to include the ums and the ahs and the other words?
Yeah, we did find a service that does not strip those out. I will say it's not perfect. And there are definitely a lot of cases where things come back that is not right. I can still tell, but we're in a position right now where we actually just wanted to make sure that we even had a market for this. And I talked to a guy who had been doing a lot of this stuff for years, and he's like, dude, you could spend a year or two just trying to tune this thing. And at the end of the day, it's just going to be a science experiment, and your product is going to be long gone. Like whatever customers you thought you had, they definitely will have moved on. So, you know, we tried a little bit of both, and we're in the sort of the process of taking what this outside service is doing, but then also sort of layering ours on top of it as well. So kind of trying to play a dualistic role, kind of having a foot in both sides of it, knowing full well that we would like to have our own model, you know, kind of going down the path that you did, but also knowing that it's a fair amount of investment and time up front until we really can glom onto a user base. And sometimes good enough is good enough, right? With some of these things, it's especially, I would say, any entrepreneur or startup, you know, just build for the now, whatever you can sort of fake it and at least paint a picture of where you want to go. If people get what you're talking about and the value you're bringing with your artificial intelligence startup, then you're onto something, right? And you can figure out about sort of how to make it work behind the curtain and tune all the dials in the future. But it can be, there's a lot of dials to tune, I will say, when it comes to AI models. There's a lot of things that you can play with that you don't even 100% know. It's probably a whole different conversation with regards to explainable AI. Like how can you explain actually what's going on under the covers? We have a question here from Frank. I'll just sort of read it sort of outright. And Frank, if you wanted to unmute yourself, if I have anything wrong, but he was wondering, what kind of metrics do you use in the validation phase? And then while developing and then while developing an AI solution. So are there metrics restricted to typical machine learning metrics, so precision recall, or are you using other metrics? How about metrics for discovering bias, for example? So I think, I mean, Frank, if you wanted to explain or maybe guide this towards a specific person on the panel, that would be great.
Yeah, I was just coming up with this question while listening to Marliana, because she was talking about the validation phase, and that immediately for me came, you want to measure your metric, right? Or measure your solution. And first of all, you want to figure out whether this is actually a good solution for the problem you're solving. And then when you're developing it, in my experience, you often kind of like fall into the typical machine learning metrics like precision and recall, and that sometimes goes away from what is actually measuring what a user actually wants. So I was wondering whether you have any experience or advice in terms of what kind of metrics you find particularly useful for that.
Was that for me?
For you, for everybody, but I came
Yeah,
up with a
so-
question when I was listening to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know at least for PipeDream, I'm not there yet, but for everything else, since I've done metrics as a business analyst, and really my thought process in this, when I think about it in terms of AI and how I want to go about it, it's going back to like what I want to achieve when I have like the list of requirements. Once I identify my flow, the process, the requirements that I want this technology to do, and what I'm solving for, I tend to make my metrics based on the requirements. Let's say, for instance, for me, I want, one of the things that I want my, if you're a high school student and we want them to be able to have real skills, one of them is that how do we keep them engaged of doing a task? For that, we do it in a form of career points that lead to eventually a micro credential for their next flow. So how do they keep doing it to get career points, and not like me, I do a Duolingo for 10 minutes and then I don't do it for like a whole month and not learning. But if we do like incentives to say, okay, if they do it for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, they get points, and we incentivize that to say, hey, we have a partnership with Chase, and if you do like this math basic problem, meaning like basic accounting in real world, the end of this would be a banking account with $100 with our partnership with Chase. That would be a metric for me, meaning that put that in form of career points. The more that they do it, let's say 10 or 15, to where they got it, that they're getting consistent answers, that they're used to it, they get rewarded based on that. And so that's kind of how I go about it with any metric that I have. It's like what I want to accomplish, and how do I know that I'm achieving that by setting out those different like milestones, the tasks I wanted to go for it. I do either something that's like wow out of crazy, just to give a baseline to say, let's say they have to do 100. If they're not hitting 100, I want to know why they're not hitting 100. Like, okay, that's too crazy. Let's do it down to 50. If they can do 50, I might have some activity there. And I just keep adapting as I go to really understand where they are from an analytical standpoint, and then where do I get them to where I need them to be.
Awesome. Is there any
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, anybody else wanted to add to that at all?
We do use a lot of precision and recall and F1 score metrics for our named entity models and for some of the question answering. It's a little bit trickier with the question answering because we get a score for an exact match, and that's easy to measure. But oftentimes, if you ask an actual language question, the answer that gets pulled back from the text may be semantically correct. It may be a correct answer, right? But it's not the correct answer that was tagged in the training set. And so we also use a semantic, it's called SAS, I think, semantically similar answer, SSA, that actually does a semantic similarity score between the answer and the answer that was extracted and the annotated answer to see if they're close. And then it can augment the precision and recall to give us a sense of whether we're actually hitting the target or not. I mean, that also goes to feedback loops, right? I mean, that's another part of deep learning that we haven't really touched on yet, which is how do you build up, you can start with a generic training set, but how do you then take user feedback to help augment your model? And I'm sure, Ari, this would be a good question for you as well. Like, how do you make sure that the feedback that the users are providing isn't introducing bias into the model, right? Do you run it back through the existing model, or how do you do that? You know,
so right now.
Yeah. So in some of our projects, we actually have a 3-person team that's doing annotation, and they're all blinded. And so and oftentimes all 3 will agree, but then there are cases where we get different answers from the 3 different people. And then that goes to a 4th person for kind of like a moderation of what the correct answer should be based on the procedures and policies that we've defined for the models.
Are these people, in your case, Mike, that need to be highly trained? Or can these just be people that are through Mechanical Turk or something? Yeah,
so these are actually, so one of the things our software does is it lets the end client do that training. So oftentimes it is SMEs that are specific to a particular domain that are knowledgeable about diseases or drugs or what have you. And they're doing the annotation in the software, and then that feeds back into a model that gets deployed on their particular instance.
Is that I mean, would you consider that a KNN modeling? Is that what area?
I think so. I'm not sure if it falls exactly into KNN, but we're trying to create an annotation tool that isn't just one user feeding us the data, right? Mm-hmm. We're trying to capture as much information as we can about the same question, the same data point, so that we can diversify the values that we're getting from the training.
You just reminded me of another scenario. I just completely forgot it. There is one for like kind of like a non-software prototype that I have. One of the inputs that I have for my model is like the assessment, personality assessment. And I use this example a lot. You probably might be familiar with personality tests. This is my favorite one with the colors. And right now, just a sample prototype is that we have, like, let's say, identifies the yellow as a person who's very energetic. And then my complete opposite is usually my manager, who's the blue, who's like, I just care about details, facts, and don't really have emotions. And so this is going back to what I said earlier about control data and having a metric, meaning that if I want a child to be able to to have a reaction. I want to train a model to say that if I want you to recognize a person who's a yellow, who's energetic through like the five senses, basically how they talk, how they do all those things. We can't do that now because we're early in the phase, but we program the data into like the software and the models for a person do assessment and they identify as yellow, but we train the model based on the blue. Say that if a person asks this question, and one of those questions identify a person who will be a blue, then the model will react as a personality blue. So that is the kind of data that I'm controlling to get the type of reaction I want to know how a model will react in that case, or if I need to update it or adapt it as usual to the point where it can go to a bigger, broader perspective where the model is learning all the different personality types. And that's going to be a challenge for us because humans are unpredictable. But in a control route, we know that there's a basic type of personalities, but just starting small and training a model on the different type of personalities that we see in the workplace, how can a person identify that personality in the workplace and react to that based on their performance? So that's one example of a metrics that we're working on now as a prototype to say, here's the basic colors. Well, how would that model react if I choose this option? And how will I respond to that to keep their interaction together?
Sure, for sure. Well, good. I sort of have a sort of one last question that I think we'll go around, and of course we'll open it up to see if anybody else, but I wanted to ask this question for everybody. Maybe since Marlaina, you were just speaking, you could start this. You might have touched on it a little bit, but the question is, if we have this exact same panel next year, let's say, it's November 4th, 2022, what are some goals that maybe you would say you would have accomplished with your business? And then, what might you be talking about as success metrics? I guess provided, or I guess applied specifically to artificial intelligence. So what are some things you would hope that both your business, but also maybe AI has improved, and you could look back and say, this was great. We solved this, at least in the next year.
That is a good question. I had to think on that one. I think for me, it's actually going back to earlier I said just a few minutes ago, is that having a simple personality test in a software that give you that simulated experiences. Right now, what's important for me is thought leadership. For those who's looking to get in tech but don't know it yet, so at least they have the basic skills, and so teaching them those basic transferable skills that prepare them for the real world. I want to go through a simulated experience on at least one or two top careers out there so they can get an idea like, oh, this is what my day in a life would be like for that. So that's a little bit long-winded, but my goal is to have like the bare minimum MVP non-software that a person get a chance to experience that and scale it from there.
Awesome. You had me. I wanted to say, I mean, is VR a part of this at all? Could somebody experience this through goggles?
See, you're jumping ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
That is my ultimate goal, the spaceship that my accelerator programs keep telling me that I need to start small. And that was my initial thought going into this. I see this eventually going into augmented reality and into VR for a career simulation experience where you literally just say, you know what, today's I'm a program manager. I'm doing a task of a program manager. I'm doing a developer work, like you're literally doing work, or let's just take into augmented reality to like not working on a real car, but you're actually working on a car and identify those things. So I definitely have a vision for it to go up with more immersive technologies. But before you're a unicorn, you have to be a zebra. So we're starting small to get there.
Yeah, no, maybe not a 2022 thing, a 2023 or beyond thing,
We're
but
going to shoot for 2022. You'll be surprised, especially with Meta
all right,
from
all right,
Facebook.
great. Ari, you wanna take that question?
Oh my God, that's a huge question. I have huge ambitions for November 2022. Um, wow. I want to, I would love, and my goal is to, at this time next year, for SIT to be ready to go to market and have gone through all the testing, has been validated, that we have all the, key partnerships that we are looking to have from academia, from industry, and government engaged and collaborating with us to build this open source ethical AI solution. That would be, what I envision for 2022.
Excellent. Great. Cool. Yeah, I could definitely see you already starting to make some dents in the world, I think, here, even by that time, next year, if you can point to, hey, we're shaving out just a little bit of bias, right? It's, we know it's going to take many years. But I think just getting momentum going in that space would be a huge win. And I think you're already starting. So
thank you.
Looking forward to it. Mike, November of next year, where are you hoping you guys will be at?
That's a good question. I think a couple of areas that we're trying to focus on is some software related things like faster model training, more variety of models that are available. We're adding more data sources into our canonical data fabric. So we have clinical trials and PubMed and patents and a bunch of things like that. And we're trying to get into some preprint publication repositories as well, to basically expand the knowledge that we can analyze as part of our canonical offering. And then I think the other big thing for us is we've been working in the life sciences and healthcare space for a long time now, and we've got a lot of good traction there. It turns out that the same technology is easily applied in other industries. So we're going to start branching out and diversifying the client base that we're talking to and building new models in other industries using the same technology, but different types of data, and then focusing different offerings for different types of industries based on the same technology.
That's awesome. Cool. Very good. Yeah, that whole idea of transfer learning you were talking about earlier is fascinating. Being able to, not have to retrain everything from scratch as you sort of move from application to application.
Do you all have any patents?
We do. We have a couple patents. We have one about natural language question answering in spreadsheets, and we have another one that talks about knowledge graphing of answers retrieved from questions.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to connecting with you to learn more about how you all reached that point, because that's definitely something that we'll have to start thinking about this time next year at the very least.
Absolutely.
Well, I think when it comes to connecting too, I'm going to put the link here to our meetup page, and I think I have people's LinkedIn profiles, everyone on there, that people can jump off to if they want to connect to any three of you. Anybody who's listening to this or watching this, basically drop off to the meetup page, and I'm assuming LinkedIn's a good place to connect with you. The three of you send out a LinkedIn connection and talk to anybody who's in our AppliedAI meetup group. We're kind of coming up to the top of the hour here. Were there any other questions from people at all? At least on the chat, or anybody want to jump in and ask something real quick? Otherwise, we can call it an evening. It's already been an hour and a half, and we've had a lot of great conversation. I appreciate Marlaina and Ari and Mike for coming on the show here tonight or whatever, and just being open, just being very open with regards to what you're doing in your startup, sort of what your mission is, how you're applying artificial intelligence to it. And I guess if anything, I would just say from the outside here, I feel very inspired, right? There's a lot of ways that we're using artificial intelligence that I think, even 5 years ago, none of us would have been thinking, this way.
Right.
And so the power of all of this data and the new deep learning, machine learning techniques, the hardware that's available now, of course, these days, and the new analysis that we can do and stuff, it's only going to get better. But we have sort of three, and if you include sort of the companies that I'm working with here, 4 or 5 different ways that we're attacking like real world problems in business, problems in society, problems in culture. I mean, there's just problems in education. We're coming at it from all sorts of different angles, and I think it's just super inspiring. So thank you so much for being here and sharing what you all are doing.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having us.
Such an exciting field to be in.
For sure. Well, cool, everyone. Thanks for showing up this month. And like I said at the beginning, we'll be doing it the first Thursday of the month. So December 2nd will be our next meetup, and look forward to seeing everyone there.
Thanks
Thanks
you.
again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.